Pilate's question, "What is truth?" might be asked with varying intentions. It might be a sincere inquiry, assuming that the word truth stood for something assignable, and asking what that thing exactly was. A sincere answer might then be forthcoming, such, for instance, as is contained in this book. Very likely, however, the original demand would not have concerned so abstract a subject as the ontological nature of truth, considered as a logical category. The question would rather have touched what might be true in the concrete, in some such matter as religion or scientific theory, and then an adequate answer would be well nigh endless, involving all conventional human knowledge. Pilate, however, and those who have repeated this question were probably not desirous of learning anything. Their question was merely an exclamation of impatience, uttered in mockery or bravado, or perhaps in despair. If the sentiment were despair, it might be as honest as the innocent desire to know. In both cases, we should be assuming the definite reality of the truth. In the one case, by looking for it hopefully, and in the other case, by thinking of it so grandly and placing it at so great a remove that the hope of ever possessing it would seem to us chimerical. Yet this honest kind of despair could only be momentary, and occasioned by some inordinate ambition to know all truth or to know the most comprehensive truths infallibly, something not consonant with the nature and station of man. Disappointment there, though sharp, would soon yield to contentment with such knowledge as is natural to us, and humanly interesting. Truth near home in many a detail is continually revealed to us. We cannot open a door or receive the answer to a letter without finding verified sundry assumptions made currently by instinct, and being assured that, in some sense, they were true. Amongst these familiar truths, any educated man will place the elements of geography, biology, and history, and these, if his mind is open and unprejudiced, will suffice to show him the place of man in nature, the character of his organs of sense, and the images formed by these organs, together with the general history of human opinion. In view of these facts, he would become aware that all human knowledge of truth, by virtue of its seat and function, must be relative and subjectively colored. It expresses the sensations and expectations of a specific animal. It is therefore vastly different, both in extent and texture, from the literal and complete truth about the universe. This relativism, no doubt, shocks and humbles the spontaneously poetic mind. Spirit is initially addressed to omniscience as it is to perfect freedom and happiness, and even to absolute power. These sweeping ambitions are involved in the synthetic character of spirit, in its moral warmth and in its cognitive transcendence, an idea over remote times and places, also in its inevitable isolation or egotism. And the same ambitions are encouraged by the real aesthetic and dialectical fertility of mind, when once an organism has flowered into consciousness and begun to dream. To find itself harnessed to facts that it cannot control, to find itself helpless and mistaken, is therefore a hard lesson for the spirit. But this chastening is not fatal. On the contrary, it is positively enlightening and steadying. Not only does appropriate knowledge and picturesque and infinite vistas remain open, but spirit can now bring order into its own house and consecrate itself to its essential vocation without being distracted by vain hopes. Far, however, from denying or doubting the being of truth, such relativism as to knowledge doubly asserts it. On the one hand, it presupposes much true information about nature and human life, because criticism, even if we call it skepticism, is founded on knowledge. On the other hand, The reality of an unknown truth beyond the human sphere is thereby asserted emphatically and even pathetically. We should not need to beweep our ignorance if there were nothing to know. The post-religious agnosticism, widespread in the 19th century, was suffering from the vacuum left by a lost faith in revelation. In pottering about amongst appearances and talking about science and progress, it felt secretly empty and bereaved. The truth, which had seemed to shine so warm and near upon a former age, had receded to an infinite distance and been eclipsed forever. The agnostics often felt some tenderness for the lost illusions, and what they smiled at bitterly and regarded as inexcusable was rather the impudence of lay philosophers who ventured to proclaim the absolute truth of their toy systems. That was a double insult to the wise and the sorrowful. It ignored the depths of nature about us. It ignored also the depths of imagination and religion within us, by which the old faith had been inspired. As belief in the reality of material objects is never more acute than in the dark, when we are groping cautiously and intently amongst them, so the reality of overarching truth was never more painfully acknowledged than by these arguments, conscious of not being able to define its form. Luckily, honest agonies are brief. We become callous to ignorance as we do to poverty, danger, or solitude, and presently a new healthy equilibrium is established in the mind. Custom and necessity carry us bodily along in conventional speech and action. We live with our images and metaphors without prying too closely into their credentials, as we live with our friends. And if in speculative moments misgivings overtake us, either we deliberately cover our heads with the hood of resignation, or perhaps we are visited by some sudden revelation and conspire with ourselves to trust it. In either case, whether by abstinence or divination, we join mankind in positing a comprehensive and inviolate truth hanging above us, and making our falsehoods false and our truths true. In Pilate's question, however, we may detect a subtler and more insidious suggestion. He feels he has hold of nothing, and he mocks reality. Mockery is a means of restoring our self-respect by universalizing our hollowness. As if he said, "Did I ever trouble about truth? No. Then why are these fools talking about it? The truth is that there is no truth." Self-contradiction could not be franker. Evidently, to deny the truth is to make an assertion and thereby to allege that there is a truth. Yet a formal refutation of this sort remains rather puerile. It would ignore the depth of irritation, animal courage in that self-contradiction, the scorn of words, the reversion to primitive slumber. Even on the rational level, the verbal contradiction may be easily removed by a distinguo, which itself is necessary and important, in saying, "The truth is that there is no truth." We use the word truth in two different senses. Even on the rational level, the verbal contradiction may be easily removed by a distinguo, which is itself necessary and important. In saying, "The truth is that there is no truth," we use the word truth in two different senses. In the first clause, truth means the truth. In the second clause, it means knowledge of the truth. Now, the truth might well be that there were no human opinions or criteria of certainty. And although a Cretan may not properly say that all Cretans are always liars, a laughing god might say so with perfect consistency. In fact, the truth has a superhuman status, so that an absence of true opinions or criteria would not in the least abolish it. Moreover, spirit, which also is human only by accident and may forget its physical seat, can readily conceive an experience that should be inwardly irrelevant to truth altogether, so that within that experience there should be no problems, no alleged true opinions. and no category of truth or of error. It would suffice that such an experience should remain aesthetic and should never posit any removed object, even any removed part of itself. Music, for instance, is in this case. And if certain philosophies, like fine arts, aspire to the condition of music, they actually aspire not indeed to deny, but to forget the truth. Of course, the most irresponsible dance of feelings and images would be shadowed in all its convolutions by the truth about it, as any existence is inevitably shadowed. But it need not see its own shadow. It need never stop to consider the truth about itself. If the word truth fell somehow from outside into those buzzing ears, the retort might come from within with perfect sincerity. There is no truth. Such, I think, would be the only radical and wholly honest denial of truth, and of all that, in one's own mind, the notion of truth was absent and needless. Great multitudes of animals would doubtless say so if they could speak, but in human philosophy, the denial of truth is something late and artificial, a contorted, confused, and villainous effort to squirm away from one's intellectual conscience. In a compact society where all the world is of one opinion, the worldling will be cocksure of the truth. But when society is loose and decadent, why should he commit himself to any one of 1,000 conflicting, exacting, and narrowing systems? To choose rationally, he would need to dig down to first principles. But to what first principles? He has probably decayed himself at the core, and can find no first principles there. His obvious course is then to choose at each turn whatever views may be convenient, and to proclaim that there is no truth. Civilizations are often partly rotten before they are ripe, so that chronologically there may be no great interval between the sophists who deny the being of truth and the philosophers who endeavor to piece the truth together or to defend it, as it may have inspired an earlier age. Thus, in Greece, the chief sophists were hardly later than the chief naturalists and lawgivers, and earlier than Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. In respect to truth, the two famous sayings reported of Protagoras suffice to set the essential problem. Man, he said, is the measure of all things, of that which is, that it is, and that which is not, that it is not. And he also said, true is what happens to each man at each moment. I am not concerned with the historical question, vain and insoluble in itself, as to what may have been the exact connotation of these phrases in their author's mind. I take them as public property, to be turned to the best uses of which they are still capable. The first maxim will serve admirably for the first principle of humanism. Humanism begins in the moral sphere, with the perception that every man's nature is, for him, the arbiter of values. So far, this view merely universalizes the gospel text that the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. From such moral enlightenment, however, we may easily slip into equivocations that will land us in moral chaos. In saying that a man's nature is, for him, the arbiter of values, we may understand that nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. We shall then have confused what a man is with what he thinks he is, and identified his interests with his wishes. Under cover of freedom to be ourselves, we shall be denying that we have any true nature, and under cover of asserting our native rights, we shall be denying that we have any ultimate interest. Humanism, so understood, will have disintegrated humanity, declared all passions equally good, and proclaimed moral anarchy. These equivocations may extend beyond the sphere of morals and may end in identifying all reality with consciousness. The first maxim of Protagoras, that man is the criterion, will have become equivalent to his second maxim, that the criterion is the present moment. Yet, even in regard to the present moment, there is a serious ambiguity. The word which I have translated by appears might rather mean seems true or is thought to be true. If we took this second meaning seriously, far from denying the being of truth, we should be regarding truth as omnipresent and revealed by every thought or perception. In other words, we should be asserting that consciousness is never a passive feeling but always cognitive, capable of entertaining no appearance without regarding it as a description and thinking it true. This may well be the case in action, when consciousness is on the wing and carried by animal faith to intend what is not given. But to make this self-transcendence universal would be the extreme of intellectualism, something impossible to attribute to Protagoras or to his modern emulators. Moreover, if all consciousness were cognitive, it could hardly be regarded as always veridical, and this claim to infallibility is only a playful or sarcastic way of saying that no opinion is true in a significant sense, because no moment of consciousness can have a removed object, but must necessarily regard only the image or idea then present to the mind. For this reason I have rendered the term used by Protagoras by appears, rather than by seems true or is thought to be true, because the ultimate position can hardly be other than this, that when that which appears is thought true, the appearance becomes an illusion, and that this appearance is true only in the sense that it verily appears, in which sense all appearances are true equally. The Greek sophists were great men of the world addressing little men of the world. They could not be expected to push skepticism into the sphere of common sense. Its use was merely to discredit speculation and authority. The Greeks in general were given to speech-making before the crowd. They might cast ridicule on all reported knowledge and raise a laugh. They could hardly expect to carry their audience with them if they denied the existence of that audience, or the intimate, shrewd ratiocinations of each man in the crowd, hugging his own thoughts and his own interests. Therefore, the unchallenged and unexpressed presuppositions of all criticism in this school must be the existence of conventional human society and the intelligent egoism of each of its members. All else in heaven and earth might be challenged with applause, if reduced to these comfortable and convincing terms. Was the being of truth then denied by the sophists, or could they deny it? Yes, if we think only of the truth as proclaimed by particular opinions. All things said to be true might be false. Whatsoever depended on argument might be challenged by an opposed cleverer argument. Whatsoever depended on usage, faith, or preference might be reversed by a contrary pose, so that every man remained free to think and do what he liked, and to deny all authority. This, though with a different moral tone and intention, was also the position of the skeptics. They despised opinion and collected contradictory arguments in order to liberate the mind from every pledge and the heart from every earthly bond. These indomitable doubters stood firm as rocks in their philosophy, and even the sophists were sure of their wisdom and knowingness in playing their chosen parts in the world. For both schools, then, there was an unspoken truth, namely, that life was a treacherous predicament in which they found themselves without a reason, and that they were determined, whether nobly or nimbly, to make the best of it. Their moral philosophy left the cosmos problematical while taking for granted abundant knowledge of human affairs and human character. If that age had had a turn for introspection and autobiography, it might have erected a doctrine of the march of experience. Trust in memory and expectation and the mutual communication of many minds might have issued in a system like modern psychologism. The view that all we see, say, and think is false, but that the only truth is that we see, say, and think it. If nothing be real except experience, nothing can be true except biography. Society must then be conceived as carried on in a literary medium with no regard to the natural basis of society. If the ancients never hit upon such a system of biographical metaphysics, the reason doubtless was that they were too intelligent. In filling out their fragmentary natural knowledge with myths, they had originally invented other and more beautiful natural beings to help carry on the world. When the conflict of theories had made the natural world seem problematical, they preferred to abstain from voluntary follies, and not to credit anything so fantastic as that one sight or sound or pleasure or pain might generate another in a vacuum. It mattered little how events might be generated. The point was bravely to enjoy and endure and mock them as they came. Such spiritual courage, however, is physically barren. Heroic skepticism soon withered, and officious sophistry soon found nobody to listen to it. A new image of truth was rising in the East, evoked by inspiration, frankly miraculous and destined to be sustained and rekindled for ages only by faith. The dominance of this imposing speculative doctrine, long identified with the truth, has caused the denial of truth in modern times to assume a special character. It has seemed to go with enlightenment, with science, with the pursuit of truth. How indeed should anyone pursue the truth if he were sure he possessed it? Trust in inspiration is something retrograde. It reinstates the primitive dogmatism of the senses, but reinstates it on the imaginative plane, where the object is some speculative idea or vision of the invisible, in regard to which, with a clear faith, is harder to maintain. Protestants had freely criticized the doctrines of the Church, but only by appealing to the infallible text of the Bible, or to some new inspired image of the truth formed in their private meditations, and each had claimed for his shade of doctrine the authority of absolute truth. In view of so many wrangling truths, the wiser and more humorous heads could not but distrust all conclusions. Free thought became romantic. Ever to decide what you thought would be to stop thinking, and the eternal search for truth demanded that you should never find it. But for a humanist or an empiricist, the truth never to be found differs little from a nonentity. How then avoid the conviction that fruitful science and adventurous philosophy imply a denial that there is any such thing as truth? This conviction, suggested by that chaos of inspired opinions which was the weak side of Protestantism, was fortified by what gave Protestantism its strength, namely subjective depth and sincerity. When sensuous dogmatism breaks down and we discover an optical illusion, ipso facto, we discover a scientific truth, and we clarify the contrast inherent in all investigation between superficial appearance and material reality. When, on the contrary, some illusion of the intellect is detected, or we lose faith in a revealed truth, No other comparable conception is at hand to take the place of the discredited view. Revelation and truth go by the board together, and we are driven back upon immediate experience and the inner fountain of ideas. These we must continue to accept unless we should stop living, but we accept them now only as phenomena of life in ourselves, only as a kind of intellectual music which we cannot help making. Because such is the fertility of our genius or marvelous influence upon us of we know not what cosmic climate. Some lurid romantic cloudland, in that case, truly envelops and contains us, and though the truth might then seem chaotic to us, because not amenable to our moral or grammatical categories, it would be nevertheless precisely the truth it was, and would display all our random visions and emotions precisely in their true places and true relativity. We should then be talking nonsense when we said we denied the being of truth, this truth being avowedly in respect to us, that we were in a plastic and ill-determined phase of intelligence, and honorably unwilling to pin our faith on any hasty dogma. Thus, as among the ancients, so among the moderns, the denial of truth is due to palpable confusions between truth and knowledge of truth, between essence and existence, between the ideal and the actual. It might seem that matters might easily be set right by recalling a few definitions, yet these verbal equivocations are not merely perverse, they are incidental to slow, voluminous shifts in morals and culture. The truth posited by animal faith in action or in curiosity is posited as unknown, as something to be investigated and discovered, and truth in this transcendent sense can never be denied by an active mind. But when animal faith has already expressed itself in conventional ideas, its own further action finds those ideas obstructive. Truth has now been rashly posited as known. An idea, an idol, has taken the place of the God originally and intrinsically invoked by the mind, and posited as unknown. But this is a scandal. How should the thoughts of the wisest human head coincide with the intrinsic essence of any object or event, not to speak of the universe in its totality? The truth that the critic or heretic then denies was itself a blasphemy, and in denying it, he is secretly animated by the love of truth. What he denies is only the existence of any view in which truth is contained once for all and without qualification. Even if we admit prophecy and supernatural inspiration, the most rapt of prophets can only signalize, adumbrate, and clothe metaphorically the truth revealed through his lips, and not fathomed by his own rational mind. The most explicit of creeds is called a symbol of the faith. The relation which any such symbol may bear to the truth is evidently a historical accident, and the more clearly we perceive the inevitable, all-comprehensive, eternal being of truth, the more improbable or even impossible must seem the notion that any human conception should ever do it justice.